Hey, Stephen, thanks for having me. This place is fantastic.
It's a lot of fun, isn't it?
It is. I can't wait to talk about cars and watches.
Well, we'll be talking about some watches that are from the same period as these cars. That's the fun part.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. As a matter of fact, I know something I've heard about in the news lately, I've seen a lot on social media, is all about the Monaco and an auction. And if you would, I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I've always had an interest in the Monaco. I've seen it around. I've never really dove in, and you lent me a great piece here that is absolutely beautiful. So how did this even start?
Well, let's talk about it, and let's tell everybody who we are. So I'm Steve from Royal Jewelers in Andover, royaljewelers.com. If you're ever looking for a new watch from an authorized retailer, that's us, or a certified pre-owned watch, please contact us. So let's talk a little bit about watches, and watches that we're talking about tonight will be, as you mentioned, from the auction period. There's an auction going on, or soon, with Phillips, and they're featuring a Steve McQueen Monaco, as well as a Paul Newman Daytona Rolex.
So this is Steve McQueen, the guy, the myth. This is his watch, or close to.
Well, yes and no. So this is an original Heuer Monaco from 1970-71, and it is pretty much identical to the watch Steve McQueen wore in the film Le Mans and made this watch famous. So yes, but it is not the one that was actually on his wrist. And this one's also very unusual, Daniel, because this one has a bracelet on it.
Yeah, I can see
Heuer
that.
Bracelet.
Usually you see him on leather straps. I think that's what, anytime I see him in an ad or I see him in a catalog or something like that, they always have the leather straps. But this is pretty unique.
Yes, it is. Quite unique. So that watch was developed, the Heuer company was started in 1860 by Edward Heuer. And they quickly moved into being a watch company that did timing for vehicles. And then in 1933, they came out with the dashboard clock. So we were able to talk about rallying and racing associated with Heuer. Then in around 1969, Heuer was the very first watch company to ever sponsor a professional race car driver. And Joe Seifert, who was driving Formula One as well as driving for Porsche, was the first race car driver that they sponsored. And if you notice any pictures of him in his uniform, it says Heuer Chronographs or Heuer Watches on the big patch that's on his shoulder.
I got a quick question for you. I know,
Yes.
Speaking of auctions, you're wearing a Rolex Reverse Panda Daytona. And obviously this is a pretty big watch for its size, especially comparing such a smaller watch like that of the day, of the time period, like all these cars here. This seems, for me, this is a great size watch, but back then this must have been huge.
It was. So when you start thinking about 1970, 71, 72, which a lot of these vehicles are from, so we've sort of captured the essence of and the esprit of these watches. If you were shopping for a sports chronograph watch, you would have gone into an authorized retailer looking at this, the Monaco, or you would have been looking at the Speedmaster, or you probably would be looking at the Rolex Daytona. And those watches, the Daytona, for example, was at 37 millimeter, where you're looking at the Heuer, which is also very unique in terms of its shape. So this was the first chronograph that was done, first of all, first automatic chronograph. And this automatic chronograph was designed by Jack Heuer and his team. It was supposed to go into a Carrera case, and you're familiar with the Heuer Carreras. And this watch was designed, or I should say the movement was designed, then the case was designed, and as you say, oversized, because at that time the automatic movement for a chronograph was oversized.
Now, is this considered like what you call a tonneau-shaped case or a tonneau?
No, it's actually a square, and a unique square too, because again, as I said, waterproof and automatic.
This must have been game-changing at the time, late 60s, early 70s.
No question, because if you're looking at the competitive models at the time, which would have been the Speedmaster, manual wind, the Rolex Daytona, manual wind, so being an automatic, this was a game changer.
Now, for me, when I think about collecting Tag Heuer, I think Tag, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Now, this is obviously a Heuer, which goes further back. Where did Tag even come into play? How did they get associated? How did that marriage take place?
Sure. 1983, the Technique Avant-Garde, that group out of Luxembourg, bought into the Heuer company, and then it became Tag Heuer. So from 1983 on, Tag Heuer, 83 South, Heuer company.
Now, I understand that they're also making new models of this and new versions, which I'm excited to see. This, learning everything that I am tonight and from you and Royal Jewelers is really opening my eyes more towards Tag Heuer, but more specifically towards the Monaco watch. I'm sure this is pretty good to what's coming out soon or some of the later models that are out there right now.
Sure. So this, as I said, was an original, and the original had your crown on the left-hand side and your pushers on the right. And this model was available with a blue or gray dial only. So now what Tag Heuer has introduced is sort of a re-edition, which is the automatic movement with the pushers on the right, the crown on the left, in either blue or gray.
This is fantastic. I really appreciate you taking me through the carriage house and showing me these awesome cars and showing me this awesome watch. It's awesome.
Most certainly is, and thank you for saying that, but we have to talk a little bit about this one too. So this is another watch that is extremely hot right now, and actually has been for quite a long time, and this is the Paul Newman Rolex Daytona.
Let's trade.
Let's trade. So you'll notice that watch, smaller in size, extremely comfortable, on an oyster bracelet, 37 millimeter. This was a watch that actually was not a very good selling watch in its day. Not sure why it wasn't very popular, but it came primarily with a panda dial, or a reverse panda. And this is unique because it has what is known as an exotic dial. Paul Newman did a film called Winning, and he wore that film, or I should say wore a watch like this in the film. He loved the watch so much and mentioned it to his wife, that Joanne Woodward, a famous actress as you know, she ended up buying one for him as a gift with that exotic dial, and hers was engraved, or the one that he has, is engraved with Drive Carefully Me. So you'll notice the back of that does not have Drive Carefully Me on it, because if it had, it would have been the one that sold at auction for over 17 million.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I think in the last probably 4 or 5 years, all you hear about is Daytonas and Newman Daytonas. Maybe talk a little bit about the history, about what was his real impact on the Rolex Daytona?
Huge. So the Daytona, well, actually prior to being called the Daytona, Rolex had a chronograph model. And back in 1962, 63, 64, it looked pretty much like what you're looking at today. When they changed the name to sort of give it more of a racing feel, to become more competitive, and they named it the Daytona after the famous 24-hour race, the 24 Hours of Daytona, which takes place in Daytona, Florida. Paul Newman, as I mentioned, wore it in the movie Winning. He then had one on his wrist, so on the track, off the track he had one. And then Paul became a famous racer himself. And many years ago, I was a manager for a Can-Am racing team, and as a result, bumped into Paul a fair amount of times. So as I think about it, I'm probably one of the only watch dealers in the world who has seen up close and personal Paul Newman actually wearing his Paul Newman. But because he was the one who wore it, it became popular in the film. The film was very popular in Italy, and it started selling very well there, and then started selling well around the world, and it was known as the Paul Newman Daytona.
So it was really Paul and what he did in the movie and the movie itself that really launched the Paul Newman Daytona.
Well, he was a super cool guy.
Yeah.
And a guy with a great amount of character and integrity, and an unbelievable racer. I saw him race many times, and particularly for the age that he was, an incredible race car driver. So he had a lot of respect. A lot of people looked up to him. That was the watch he wore, and who didn't want to be Paul Newman? So everybody wanted one of those watches.
Well, knowing the history, knowing all about Newman, the movies, these cars here, the watch, I feel like I'm holding a piece of history here. This is really cool.
In a sense, you are, yes. And again, as I said, we've captured the esprit, if you will, the spirit of what these watches are about. If you owned one of these cars back in 1970, 71, 72, the watch that you would be wearing probably would be one of these two watches.
Well, let me go back to the Monaco for a second, because I know you at one point, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were actually in Monaco. And did you not meet Patrick Dempsey, who's also a big watch fan and also a big racing fan?
So yes, actually, but I spent time with Patrick at the Indianapolis 500. So one year we bumped into each other there, and he looked at my watch and I looked at his watch, and we were wearing the exact same watch. And mine had a red strap on it, and he had a plain black strap on it. And he said, "Oh my gosh, let me look at that." And he pulled my hand away to look at the watch. So Patrick and I took pictures together wearing our watches. And he said, "How can I get one of those straps?" And I said, "Give me your address." And today, when you see Patrick wearing that watch, and he's been photographed many times in it, he's wearing a Royal Jewelers red strap on his Monaco.
That must be a pretty cool feeling, being that close to a pretty major actor and also having the same exact thing in common.
Yes, but I've had the opportunity to been schooled by or coached by Derek Bell, who was another wonderful race car driver of the period of Paul Newman and Joe Seifert. So I've met a number of these guys through the years.
Again, thank you so much for taking me through the history of the Monaco, the Paul Newman Daytona, showing me all these great cars. I don't know about you, I think it might be time for a nice glass of wine or some scotch.
I'm in.
Let's go.
Thank you. If you're looking for a great watch, as Daniel mentioned, either new or pre-owned, certified pre-owned, please reach out to us at Royal Jewelers in Andover, Stephen at royaljewelers.com or Royal Jewelers. Thanks.